Hello and welcome to Comic Book Herald's Hickmania, a series running through 2022, where we'll be reading and analyzing the creator-owned works of writer Jonathan Hickman from his debut, The Nightly News, through to his most recent output. We'll be reading one creator-owned work a month through 2022, and each month I'll release a new analysis with a new guest discussing the comic. Today I'm joined by Sean Dillon, editor and writer at Comic Book Herald, has also written for the likes of Panel X Panel and other outlets. We're going to be talking about The Red Wing today. Here with Sean. This is written by Jonathan Hickman. We got artist Nick Patera, colors by Rachel Rosenberg. And this was released, it started to release in July 2011 and came out throughout the remainder of that year. The Red Wing is Jonathan Hickman's fifth creator-owned work released via Image Comics. If you've been with us on the Hickmania journey, you have experienced the other four. This is the last of his sort of 4-issue miniseries cycle. You know, these short little minis that were coming out via Image. And it's a story of fighter pilots who can fly through time in this sort of ambiguous, endless time war. Okay, but the concept is very much war through time, and it's all based around fighter pilots. This is an interesting one, I think, historically, and we can talk about sort of the context and how it was hyped and released at the time. I want to talk first, though, just very broad strokes, Sean. The Red Wing is one of, I think, the most forgotten. Like for me, it's like Transhuman and the Red Wing are the two that like nobody talks about.
And there's a reason. Yeah, there's a reason we don't talk about Transhuman.
And there's a reason we don't talk about Transhuman. Although I will say, Transhuman is more interesting, I think, than the Red Wing. And I don't want to front load this with like it stinks, because I think there's value here and there's stuff that I want to talk about that does work. But let's start there just with like broadly, having read the Red Wing, having reread it now. What were you struck by on this read through, and kind of how does it sit with you?
Well, the Red Wing, a few years ago, I had a bit of a Jonathan Hickman in push, but I think it was because of Secret Wars, though it might have been other things that were happening with, people were talking about Jonathan Hickman a lot at the time. I read as many Jonathan Hickman stuff as I could. I read The Nightly News, I read Pax Romana, Red Mass from Mars, or among others. There were two that I missed out on: Secret, which I just couldn't find a copy of, and The Red Wing, which just didn't seem at all interesting to me. Like it was just a bunch of I read the first issue when they did that. I think there was a free issue thing that Image did, like a free number ones for a couple titles. That was back when Comixology was actually usable. Also,
the glory days.
Yeah. So I got the first issue and it didn't really grab me. So I basically didn't read the series until you asked me to do the podcast. So reading the series for the first time, the thing that struck out to me was it's a bit odd for Hickman. Like it's straightforward.
Yeah, I think it's probably the most straightforward thing he's done to this point. It definitely is. And I think in that regard, it almost feels like an attempt at more of a pop culture reader friendly approach to time travel. And I mean, I think the thing with Red Wing too is like, it's almost impossible not to compare it to Pax Romana because Hickman had done a time travel story.
Yeah.
And one thing the Red Wing really highlights for me is it makes me appreciate Pax Romana actually a lot more.
Yep.
Pax Romana, at least, and I was already pretty high on it. Like I like Pax Romana a lot. I think it's an engaging work. There's a lot there to dig into in terms of the history of it, the social engineering aspects, right?
So with Pax Romana, the issue seems that Hickman wanted to do Pax Romana feels like it needed 6 issues to fully work, Hickman had 6 issues of ideas. So he basically spends the last issue just doing, here's a timeline of the entire history of Rome. With Red Wing, meanwhile, you feel like it needs another issue, but he doesn't have that 5th issue idea. I think this is best highlighted in the ending page where the general talks to the lieutenant about the future, and it's revealed that the general is actually the lieutenant's son. And it's sort of the implication.
Yeah, spoiler warning. We do talk about these in detail. Yeah. Usually I say that up front. I'll put that in the show notes as well. But it's all. Let's just start there. So premise wise, plot wise, and actually first, I think you're totally right that Pax Romana feels like it's stuffed with ideas that could go not just for 6 issues, but for more, right? And we talked at the time when we did the episode about like that series, the original plan was Hickman living in like a Hellboy-esque universe, is what he talks about. Like he thought he could stay in the Pax Romana verse for years, and then it just never happens, right? But you actually feel like there's enough meat there where that sounds right. That actually sounds like something that could have happened and would have been potentially very interesting. With the Red Wing, it's the opposite. It's like there's not that much meat on the bone of the story and of the ideas. If anything, if there had been more issues, it probably would have been on characterization, I think.
Yeah.
If that would have been most useful, is to actually feel like we connect to these characters. Because, so what you're saying here is basically we have 2 fighter pilots, 2 young men, who come into the army, right? They come into the, they're joining as these time traveling fighter pilots. And one of them has a history where his, actually, I think it's both of their fathers, like went missing, right?
Something happened to them. They died.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. So like their fathers are missing. They're kind of curious about like, these are fighter pilots who travel through time. Could they be lost in time? That sort of thing, right? So there's clearly like a sense of mystery. It's not a mystery comic though. It's not really playing with like, well, what happened? We have to explore this. It's more just like, okay, they could be out there. And because we're dealing with fighter pilots who go to the past, who travel to the future, etc., obviously that's a possibility. And then the way the comic ends, which you say, is with something that feels like it should be a huge reveal.
Yeah.
Like it should be a bomb that's dropping, and a really cool turn or twist that makes you reconsider the way you read it. And it is that, but it doesn't have the heft or the impact for me. And I think a big part of that is I just never got that invested in these people, you know?
On the second read, I just noticed that they don't foreshadow this reveal at all. It just happens. Like, the book for the most part focuses on parallel universes. Is the world where the world got even worse because of the parents. Whereas the twist is a time travel twist. So you have it. The time travel story that basically popped into my head when I read the story for the first time was All You Zombies by Robert Heinlein, where the main characters revealed to be their own mother, father, lover, or brother, or all. They're the same person. It's one person.
Yeah.
One person is the same person. Is a whole family.
Yeah.
You do a time travel.
Mother, brother, grandmother, all in that order. Yeah, exactly.
I'm my own grandfather.
Yeah, no, it's totally, it's that. It's like, it's the characters that we've been interacting with, and there aren't that many, right? There's like 4.
Right.
And it's like, they're all more or less the same person. I think you can feel the reveal coming. I think, like you can feel like, okay, there has to be something here, because as these 2 young men get into the fighter pilots and they're training and we're also flashing back to the father's original journeys. And like, clearly there's a sense of like, okay, these are going to connect. Something's going to happen here. We get a reveal in the future where because the father doesn't die is the thing, right? So we get these flashbacks. That's like, we have the dramatic irony of that the father is lost in time. We get some sequences of him meeting these sort of ancient civilizations and things, which are so shorthanded Pax Romana. Like it's so very slight in the way that it's trying to do the social engineering and conversations about person from the future back in time, that sort of Less Darkness Falls influence, but it's like 3 pages of it. It's so slight. But anyway, when they get pulled to the future, because eventually that individual, the dad, gets pulled to the future, he's like being tortured by this mysterious person with cool designs. We got Nick Patera does cool designs throughout this whole thing. But it's like, okay, that's his son from this parallel universe, right? So there's all these mechanisms of things spinning and the ways that characters are interacting. And it's not even that for me, it's not that it's like confusing. It's not that it's like I'm lost in the mechanics of who is what and which reality.
It's slight. It's slight.
It's slight, yeah.
It's not so much that the characters are bad. It's not. They're not developed. There's just the stuff with. You have the stuff with the dad. You have the stuff with. But you don't really have stuff with dad. He's just dad. It's the vague concept of dad, right? It's just, we hate you because you fucked up. It's another time travel story would be Seven Soldiers. With Seven Soldiers, you have people going back in time to plunder the past for their resources because the future is terrible. Well, they it's not real. The implications of Seven Soldiers is that the reason why the future is terrible is because they keep plundering the past.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas this, it's just a vague notion of we're going to war with your timeline because our timeline sucks. There's nothing within the narrative to highlight this. It's just the timeline's terrible.
Well, and that's so like, I guess that's the thing is, we talked a little bit before we started when you wrote a review for Comic Herald of A Red Mask for Mars, and up front, you talked about this notion of the early Hickman stuff is often gesturing at ideas without sort of filling them in. And I think the Red Wing is probably guiltiest of this of any of them, because it is fully, I don't know, it's really just like, I have this idea, and I kind of want to communicate the visual spectacle of it, but otherwise I'm going to take like every shortcut imaginable, for the drama and the narrative of it. And I actually think that runs so counter to A, what Hickman is good at, and B, even just what he had done on the previous works. Like even again, like I said, like it makes me appreciate the density and the thoughtfulness of Pax Romana, which I think is the best of the bunch. The Nightly News has its problems, but it is a fully realized story, I think. A Red Mask for Mars is a similar thing, but it's the stuff that it's gesturing at is often of a superhero language that I am at least compatible in, that I am familiar with. So I kind of excuse some of the shorthands there. So in some cases appreciate, because I've read so many superhero comics. In the case of the Red Wing, the stuff it's gesturing at, like you said, is like the idea of your kids blaming you for the state of the world. The idea of like when my kids right now are in their 20s and 30s and they're living in whatever 2040s, 2050s climate change world looks like, of them looking back at me and saying, why didn't I do more? Why didn't my generation do more? That is very relatable as a concept. Okay. That is very emotionally resonant, I think, for any parent of young children right now. And I'm sure it has been, right? There's a Wilco line. Every generation thinks they're the last, thinks it's the end of the world, right? This is a constant psychology. Realities, changing obviously and shifting. That's all there. That's all good. That's all good storytelling fodder. It's just tossed in at the end. Like, well, of course we get this. And I do, but it's not built up to, I didn't think, in the narrative itself.
It doesn't even do anything interesting with the concept of time travel. Like off the top of my head, a time war is very fascinating. You're using time travel, you're using history itself to defeat your opponents. Like there's an evocative line at the beginning. Let me just pull to it.
Is this the change of their culture
line?
How
we lost the 21st century. Like that is a friggin' in mood hit. Like you like that. Nothing in the book ever lives up to that line. It's just a bunch of people shooting at each other. You basically just have space travel for most of it.
Right. And I think visually it is sold quite well. I think the way Patera and Rosenberg show the time travel, we have these sort of slanting, sliding panels, right? As pilots are clearly flying from, prehistoric dinosaurs to Egyptian pyramids, right? Like there's some really good layout work. There's some good time traveling travel, that is sold in these pages.
And then there's the four sets of 2-page spreads of just pure black, with the exception of a tiny spaceship that just highlights what it's like to be lost in space. Like you barely see the ship in them, but it's just.
And there's a confidence to doing that I think there's an arrogance, but there's also a confidence to doing that is kind of cool. I do like that confidence, because you don't see that in a lot of comics, especially again, like it's a slight book already. And if you're collecting this in a 4-issue span and one of your books is like, or even just a trade, right? And it's just 8 pages of basically black, like you have to be confident in that beat. For that to work. And I don't know that it does work because of what's around it. But I do appreciate the confidence. You said there's not necessarily that much interesting with the time travel here. And I I think broadly I agree, although like you said, like there are these tossed off ideas. Like there's another quote that I actually liked a lot. To truly eliminate an enemy, you must change their culture. Convince them that how they thought was wrong. That's a cool idea. That's very Frank Herbert, Dune-esque, right? But the book does nothing with it. It does
Like,
absolutely nothing with it. Absolutely. I think too, like Hickman, he also here does True Detective time as a flat circle before True Detective.
with,
Like that is his vision for what time is, which I don't think is like brand new or anything.
yeah, Ligotti is the obvious precursor for that.
Yeah, so like it's playing on, and I like when he actually, you can tell probably the thing that is the sci-fi of it that Hickman is most invested in is explaining some of the mechanics of this version of time travel. I don't know that it like here's the thing about time travel. I don't care if it actually makes sense,
Yeah,
generally speaking, as so long as I feel a sense of conviction and I feel a sense of sort of scientific and philosophy merging into something that sells how cool this is going to be. That's all I care about in time travel stories generally.
yeah, and from a metaphorical perspective, if you have to ask what, when reading sci-fi, oftentimes it's looking at things from a metaphorical perspective because let's be honest, time travel science is usually bunk.
Yeah.
It's rubbish. So, what does time travel mean in a story? Oftentimes, the answer is the ability to change the world. So, you're telling, like, the obvious one is quantum leap, wherein each leap, if he goes and makes something better, he helps a person who's in trouble. He prevents the assassination of Jackie Kennedy. He just all these various different things. You change going to the past is a means of changing it.
Pax
To
Romana. That's the whole premise, right? Essentially, is we're going to go back to time of Constantine and we're going to re-engineer what society is, right?
Yeah. Whereas Red Wing is basically just time travel is a place to go. It's just another field in the sky. You're just as two fighter pilots are fighting against time. With a time travel story with the premise, we are going to change your perception to make you know that you're wrong. It's
Right.
not we're going to change it by shooting you in the face. It ought to be we're going to change it by changing details. Because we're going to introduce war irrigation to culture or that didn't have it. We're going to burn a library that would have inspired a fascist revolt. Well, We're going to change history essentially.
Yeah.
This is just time travel is the sky for fireflies.
Yeah, right. Yeah, like there's no why. There's no like when a fighter pilot goes and he's soaring alongside a dinosaur, there's really no why behind it. There's no like, well, he had to go to that point in time for reason X. It's just a cool visual. I'm kind of okay with that. Except I think there needed to be a little more understanding of why like I guess if there is a narrative here that is supposed to be the core of it. It's the story of this father and son and their dynamic. Like by the end, and ironically, like this is kind of what a Red Mask for Mars does too. It's clearly something top of mind for Hickman. I imagine this is around the time his kids are probably pretty young and knew he has children, right?
Yeah, and then there's also going to his work for hire work stuff. Franklin Richards.
Yeah, sure, right. Like it's
you
a
can have time travel with that.
absolutely it's a recurring trend here. It's just like I don't know. Yeah, it's just kind of depressingly slight. I do just want to say too, like this comics now, like this is set in the 23rd century, so it's a future where this time travel is created and this time war is in action. It reminds me a little bit of Paper Girls. I think is probably a comic that does this sort of thing a lot better, at least in my view. Right, Paper Girls is absolutely a time travel story by Brian K. Vaughan and Cliff Chiang. And it also does a thing where like there's a time war, it's happening, but it's kind of all around everyone, and that's a great example. Obviously, it's a much longer series, but that's a great example where it's like we get so invested in the characters and their emotional arcs and their journey, or at least I did, that like the time travel is setting. It is visual dressing. It is not the story necessarily.
Yeah. And to use a different example that highlights the difference, there's Tom King's actual first comic was a time travel story. It's Full of Demons, which basically highlights the consequences of a time travel act. In this case, the obvious question,
what would happen if would you kill baby Hitler?
Yeah.
Or with the presumption that yes, you would kill baby Hitler. It's about his sister who lives her life through the course of, I think, 8 pages. It's a short comic that she just lives her life, and it's traumatized over the fact that her brother was murdered right in front of her by some weird space guy.
Yeah.
And over the course of the narrative, it becomes the world around her is actually a better place without Adolf Hitler.
Yeah.
Yes, you do kill Hitler, but Jesus Christ, why are you killing a child?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like,
right.
he was a fucking painter. You could kill him as a painter if you're going to kill him. Like, if you're gonna, just go to Vienna when he's a painless painter who doesn't matter.
Take the child killing trauma out of it.
Yeah,
it's a less debatable
child.
Yeah, it's a less debatable thing then for sure. Okay, yeah, totally agree. So I think yes, there are. I don't know. It definitely got me thinking about the broad use of time travel. Obviously, we've dropped a lot of references here. I actually, not even that intentionally, finally finished watching Tenet, Christopher Nolan's Tenet. I've been watching it slowly over the course of like 4 months on HBO, and just I constantly get interrupted and I'm pausing it. So like, worst way to watch it, okay? But it reminded me I feel like they're actually of a piece. I feel like they're very similar in that they have a broad idea of how they want to do time travel. They want to show that. They want to show the spectacle of that. And everything else is kind of window dressing, right? Everything else is kind of just a means to that end, which can be fun, in a way.
Yeah, but the thing with Tenet is that at the very least, you have sequences where they play with the implications of time travel. You have,
it's more thoughtful.
Like there's 2 different fight scenes that are the same fight scene played backwards and forwards. You have that sort of fun stuff, whereas Red Wing doesn't really have stuff like that. You don't have, say, a fight scene of I'm trying to think. There's a scene in Superman Beyond where they're going through where they're being attacked while traveling through various alternate universes.
Yeah,
you don't have something like that in the Red Wing.
Yeah, no, right, no, it's all. It's so funny because it's like it is the flattest thing I think Hickman has done. And I think there's, it's funny. I went back and I was reading a lot of the reviews from like 2011 because I'm just curious, like what was the reaction at the time? And you can sort of tell, and this is maybe something I would have been guilty of in the moment. I don't know. I wasn't invested at the time. But you can sort of tell that there's an assumption that this is more thoughtful and more heavy sci-fi because of Hickman's catalog to that point. Which at the time this is released, like we said, is Nightly News, is Pax Romana, is A Red Mask for Mars, and then is a lot of Marvel stuff. Fantastic Four and FF are nearing completion by the time this is coming out, his long run on that, right? So you have a really reputable, high quality catalog at that point, and you can just tell sort of in the critical reaction that there's an assumption that there's a built-in faith in the author already at that point, that like, oh yeah, the Red Wing's really smart and really thoughtful, but reading it now, it's like, it is so uncharacteristically slight, and it's an easy read. It goes down fast. It's harmless, I think, generally speaking. It's just probably my least favorite of all of the stuff so far, even Transhuman, frankly, because there's not enough to chew on. I think Transhuman, there's a lot of mess to chew on. You know what I mean?
It's actively evil.
Yeah, exactly. Like it. You know what? But Transhuman got me to read Three Fingers. Have you read Three Fingers?
No, I haven't.
Okay, it's a similar mockumentary style about a fake history of the animation industry, but it's like, what if Mickey Mouse was, a real part of the world, right? And it's this Something the Rat character, and it's all about this dark secret history of like toons and humans living together in secret.
Is this a comic or something else?
It's a graphic novel. I want to say like it's a Fantagraphics thing, but I could be off on that.
I'm looking up right now.
But Transhuman inspired me.
Top Shelf.
Yes, thank you. It's interesting. It's not like one of my favorites ever, but it's an interesting read. Transhuman inspired me to sort of go down that path. Like I said, the Red Wing gets me thinking about time travel, but it doesn't that's always interesting to me. That's not the, a credit to this book necessarily, I guess.
Yeah, you're thinking of better time travel stories while reading in Red Wing.
But even Hickman's own, like I keep saying, like Pax Romana is such a better time travel story. Like I really appreciate that. I do stuff I like. There's a really nice use of color by Rosenberg here in these fractured panel layouts to show traveling through time. I think in flight through time, I think that's probably where the book is often at its best. I also really like the idea. I don't know if it actually came out like this, but of a time travel story counting down from issue 4 to issue 1. I don't know if it came out issue 4 first, but I wish that it had. I think that's pretty.
Yeah,
pretty
it might have. I think it did, but I don't think the issues were numbered or 4 through 1.
Because that's how the covers do it in the trade. Is like 4, 3, 2, 1. And it's a very small, slight thing, but I wish in shops it had actually started that way, to the, I'm sure, madness of any retail owners.
Yeah. But I think that might also be Grant Morrison's influence, given the 3rd volume of The Invisibles goes 12 to 1.
Oh, does it? Okay, perfect. Yeah. So I've been thinking actually a lot about what creator would I want to do next. If I did this next year. So once we're going to keep doing the Hickman stuff, and like we've got good stuff to come, like I've been saying for a while, like part of what is interesting about the Red Wing is it's the last of these, and then Hickman and Patera come together again and they start the Manhattan projects,
which is a lot better.
Which is a lot better, and there's a lot to chew on and think about and discuss, and we're going to do that. And it's a much longer run. And I think one thing you see, and maybe part of the reason this feels like his first work almost. Like if the Red Wing was his first comic, that would make more sense than the Nightly News. Yeah,
it might. Yeah, I think it might be one of those cases where you write a script for a comic, but you put it aside, and then when you get big, you decide to release it. It might be like that.
Sure, right. And an excuse to like work with this creator that like, so Hickman and Patera, they had worked together in 2009 on this really goofball Astonishing Tales mini in Mojo World for Marvel. It's a Sam and Bobby story. So it's Sunspot and Cannonball, Hickman favorites. It's the first X-Men thing he ever did. Although calling it an X-Men thing is a stretch, but it's a total like goofball Mojo World thing. But they had worked together before. This wasn't the first time, and then they get together on this, and then they really take off with Manhattan Projects.
Yeah. Manhattan Projects is the kind of book that you can. There's a lot of stuff in the Manhattan Projects that the most telling thing about the Manhattan Projects is that Jack Parsons is not involved in the Manhattan Projects. Wow, is that guy's history is wild. I assume. Have you been reading Grant Morrison's Substack?
I've fallen behind. What do you think?
Okay, this was in one of the first housekeeping one they did. They mentioned that they were going to be in the show version of Jack Parsons' life if it got a 3rd season, to play Aleister Crowley.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the kind of person that's the kind of scientist Jack Parsons is.
Yeah. No, I'm definitely interested in exploring the actual history of the real Manhattan Projects, and then sort of the side by side with the Hickman fictionalized version. I think that'll be a lot of fun. But what I was getting at there is, so we've got a lot of good stuff coming in going through the Hickmania experience with these longer runs in East of West, obviously, and all this stuff. For next year, when I do go to another creator, the one that keeps coming to my head is Grant Morrison, because I am woefully underread on Morrison's creator-owned stuff. Like I haven't done the Filth. I've only touched the Invisibles. So that's probably the one that is number one on what I most want to read and catch up on. But I'll see. I've gotten some good suggestions from people listening. Like a lot of people were like, Brian K. Vaughnathon would be fun, but I've also read most of Vaughn's stuff already, so like it'd be more of a revisit for me. I saw some Ed Brubaker suggestions, which would also be fun, but like Criminal's always a good time. But anyway, that's where I'm at. It's Morrison and Moore are like the obvious two, right? Because they're the 1A, 1B of comics, and I'm sort of debating if I actually want to go that route or not.
I mean, you could also go Gillen.
Gillen would be fun too, but like that's another one where Gillen would be good, actually, but I've done Phonogram, I've done Wicked and Divine, so a lot of be revisited, which those are comics I would enjoy revisiting. Like that's not, there's nothing wrong there.
Yeah. Trying to think of I mean, problem with Morrison is that you have to read Big Dave, which is very transhuman.
Yeah. Okay. See, but like not that I like bad comics, but it is it is an interesting experience to read a mess by a big name and a creator that knows better. You know what I mean? Like it's an interesting
Yeah.
thing to consider that in their catalog. It's like listening to Metal Machine music or something, and being like, this is a artist that I love dearly, but wow, does that hurt?
Yeah, like it's like listening to Hours.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's just you can tell that there's some good songs in Hours, but you don't start an album with Thursday's Child.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's not an album opener, and it just hurts the whole experience going forward. It's not a bad song; it's perfectly fine, but not an album opener.
It's a challenge. It's a challenge, absolutely. But I enjoy a challenge, especially again. It's that thing of like I was talking about the critical reception of Hickman and the Red Wing, where it's like when you build up a level of faith, when you build up a level of confidence in a creator, you're willing to take a punch. You're like you're willing to take some hits and be like, okay, where are we going with this?
Yeah. You've read my work. I will go for weird, messy stuff.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure David, off the top of my head, I have a love for Carrie Andrews is Spider-Man Reign.
Sure.
And it's a hot mess of a book that probably needed another or two or either needed 4 issues or to be 4 double-sized issues to fully work. But it's freaking amazing. Just one of those weird comics that you really wish people all did.
I feel like Spider-Man Reign gets too easily ignored because of radioactive sperm.
Yeah, because you miss out on that's just one page, and the implication is that he's lying. It's sort of course, Peter Parker would find a way of blaming himself for his wife getting cancer.
Right? Yeah,
he would find a way of blaming himself for that.
Right. No, and that's the thing is like if it hadn't been so salacious, right, and sort of goofy, and was just like, well, my presence and my radioactive blood or whatever, like it could have been just much simpler and a version of just like the point is the guilt. But yes, that's an interesting mess of a comic for sure. That I don't think enough people give enough time.
Maybe that's what you should do next year. Invite various guests to talk about messy comics they love.
Messy comics they love. That's an interesting trend. I wonder what I'd have to go through my list and see like what's the one that I will stand up for and defend. I'd have to take a look because that is a fun concept. I enjoy it. And obviously, like I think you could probably tell from this, like we're finding other things to talk about because there's not that much to talk about with the Red Wing. I mean, truly, it's just like it just never gets out of first gear. And I wish that it did. I did want to talk to you, Sean. I don't know how well versed you are on like the history of this because again, it's all 2011 stuff. But when I was going back and looking this up, I was surprised to see in like the press and the pre-release hype, people were talking about this as like part of this Plus movement. So like there was going to be the Plus project, which was Hickman releasing 3 graphic novels, including one that he was writing and drawing again, which would have been the first time that he had done that since Pax Romana, because he writes and draws his first 2 works and then he goes on and works with different artists. This Plus project never comes to fruition. It was hyped up. It was a big thing. There was even an announcement for Feel Better Now, which was going to be, and I've got the quote here, the darkly comic story of rogue psychiatrists who manipulate their patients out of boredom. It sounds very transhuman-esque. This was going to be a one-shot, an oversized one-shot written and drawn by Hickman. It was announced, and then it got delayed indefinitely and has never come out. So, like, the Red Wing was a part of this, like, supposed to be returned to creator-owned for Hickman, which he never really leaves. I don't know, but, like, that was the way it was marketed. And it just never happened. The Red Wing started, and then this kind of gets axed, and then it's Manhattan Projects and off to the races. It's interesting.
Yeah. And then, I think what happened, best case thing I can guess what happened was he got 2 Avengers titles.
Yeah, right.
And basically did his file and basically spent hundreds of issues fishing up his Fantastic Four.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, because that's the thing is like, in 2011, Hickman's already a pretty big name in the comic scene because of Fantastic Four being very good and recognized as very good at this point. And then going into 2012 and starting in late 2012, he takes over Avengers. And at that point, he really obviously ascends because Avengers becomes the biggest movie in the world. He starts writing this really, like you said, basically continuation of his Fantastic Four run through the pages of New Avengers, all building to my favorite comic event of all time, 2015 Secret Wars. But the Red Wing is just, it's a total curiosity in the middle of all that, as all that movement is happening on the Marvel side of thing, and it's just totally overshadowed, and I think with good reason. I don't know, I find it interesting. Like, I feel like amongst Hickman heads, this has or had like a pretty positive, like, cool time travel, idea, vibe and reaction, as opposed to what it feels like to me, which is a pretty obvious disappointment, I think, given how capable he is of bigger and better,
Yeah, it's just, it's fine. It's not a bad comic. It's perfectly serviceable, but you expect more from Hickman.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing.
Or at the very least, at this length, like if it was a one shot, that there was that Deadpool thing he did with Shang-Chi a few years.
Yeah,
like,
the hot dog motorcycle race.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah,
and that, that you have that sort of stuff, but you expect that this level for something that short, like it's just 5 pages. I think it was like half an issue.
Yeah, it's short. Mm-hmm.
But at 4 issues, it just feels like you're spinning wheels.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And just not doing anything.
Instead of wheels within wheels, which is what he does well. Yeah. I think typically.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what are of the, you mentioned you had read some of these in the past and had gone back to some of them. Of the short Hickman stuff, the early releases, what is your favorite? Like, what's the one that you think works the best?
In terms of which one works the best narratively, probably the Nightly News. I haven't revisited in years, but it's probably the one that works best narratively. In terms of the ideas Hickman is gesturing towards, I actually have a lot of time for Red Mass from Mars. Sure. I know I was a bit hard on it in my article on it, but that's because I'm fascinated by the idea of utopianism and what it means for an idea to shift with time.
Yeah.
Like, you have a book about how basically the man of tomorrow goes to the future, and the people realize he's from a previous tomorrow. The tomorrow he's from has already come and passed. It's all well and good to be of an Arthurian hero, but the Arthurian heroes were kind of crap.
Yeah, and that leans into that, right?
He basically spends the majority of the book is spent doing this rote alien invasion plot where most of the interesting stuff is relegated to 4 pages or discarded as soon as possible. But you still have that interesting stuff in there that I want Hickman or another writer to just poke out with a stick and do more with in the future.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting point. That's the thing where I think the Red Wing, it's the first time I sort of realized, like, these first 5 works, maybe with the exception of the Nightly News, because I think that really begins and ends, and I think ends effectively. But the next 4, they're all kind of like, hey, I'm going to do this thing. It's going to have some cool ideas.
Pilots.
Somebody else come pick it up and run with it. They all kind of have that vibe. Almost like a pilot. Yeah, exactly. And it's like, it's kind of funny given what's happened with X-Men, where that became what actually happened, where it was like, I'm going to set the stage for what feels like it could be the coolest. And then I'm going to leave it to you, my friends and collaborators, to take that ball and run with it or not, right? Except there's no actual team that he's working with that is ever going to do that with any of the creator own stuff, which is another way of saying, I suppose, it's early in his career and he's figuring stuff out. And I think getting all the reps he gets at Marvel during this time clearly helped. I mean, clearly, like, just purely on a craft level, right? You're just learning a lot about story, but like doing a long plotting thing on Fantastic Four, seeing that worked, seeing that fans were here for that clearly opens the doors for what he's going to go on and do on Manhattan projects, on East of West, even on Black Monday Murders, even though it has stalled, and I think that's definitely for the best that those things are happening in sequence, because these little minis, they come and they say, now run with that, but there's no one there. There's no one there to grab the baton, you know? And it just kind of ends, which is somewhat disappointing. But you know, so it goes. So it goes. That's why we do the project, right? To see what is the progression of a creator that we like.
Yeah, I think this is something I noticed when reading some. You know, a couple of years back, I read Tom King's first novel, the a Once Crowded Sky.
Yeah.
Just I was curious about it, so I checked it out. I got it through Interlibrary Loan. Checked it out, gave it a read, and you can see it's what I call a first novel problem. Like, you can see the interest that the author has. You can see some of the rough edges, some of the failure states. But you can see the ideas that are going to go through their whole career here going forward. The early stuff, it's not as clear cut, or it's not as clean and straightforward as his later work, but you can see what he's going to explore, what he's interested in, and it gives you some insight. It's not the best work he's done, but you can see the through line going forward.
Well, and you can also see with that novel, you can see the ambition and sort of the willingness to experiment and try things that I think is probably the thing that I like the most about King at this point, just in very general terms. Like, the thing that always keeps me engaged with the Tom King project at this point is I know he's going to take some swings. I know he's going to try to do something interesting, and it might fall on its face. Some of them have, right? But I'm going to be engaged with the attempt.
Is the obvious one.
What's that?
Batcat's the obvious one that fell on his face.
I don't think Batcat works, but it's also like, I read that comic and I'm very interested in what's happening, because it's just like we're just hopping through time with like no explanation, and there's all sorts of nutty stuff happening on a craft and on a and it's like, that's the thing, is like if it's the first time you're reading an author and you're totally unfamiliar with them, you might read that book and be like, they don't know what they're doing, right? But with King, it's intentional. He's very intentional, and I appreciate that,
it's a lot of, like, actually, I've seen a version of Batcat that does work. It's Cry Havoc by Cy Spurrier and Ryan Kelly.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, the issue with that is that the difference between the two is that what Spurrier and Kelly do is they hire 3 colorists.
Sure.
3 separate people color the various time periods that they're going to explore. Whereas with Man, it's just one colorist going through the entire period, going through all 3.
Even Rorschach pulled that off, I actually thought, pretty effectively with the Jorge Fornes visuals, where that's a book that also does a similar thing of hopping through time and hopping through sort of, perspectives of the world, but it sells it very clearly, I thought. The clues of the visual language are there, in a way that just felt more cohesive. Whereas Batcat feels real helter-skelter, I think, a lot of times.
Yeah.
At least to me.
Yeah, it could just be Man and King aren't a good fit with each other for all that they get on with one another. They just, don't really work together as creative pair.
Yeah. It's tricky too. Like, the other piece of that obviously is I have no baggage with a new take on a Rorschach that I've never met before. I have a lot of baggage with Batman and Catwoman. like I bring a lot to that party. That is just the history of the medium, right? So, but so that's a good comp. I think it is. It's definitely, like you said, like that novel. I'm very interested in seeing the ways that creators evolve and become who they're going to be over time. And I think that's when you go through this sequence from the Nightly News through the Red Wing. You're getting a lot of that with Hickman. The only thing you're not getting is the long-term planning, and the thing that he's famous for in terms of, like resonating a bell and a 20th issue that connects back to all sorts of stuff we'd read in previous issues, right? You don't get that because everything here is short and it's a limited time frame.
Yeah.
And I guess I got to say too, like, I'd be curious now. Obviously, he's doing his 3 Worlds, 3 Moons thing and seems super invested in that. I think maybe Decorum is actually the answer I'm looking for here, in terms of like, would he be better at pulling off something that was tight and to the point now than he was at this time? Because clearly I guess House of X and Powers of 10 maybe even is a similar thing, right?
Black Monday Murders.
Well, but Black Monday Murders is like, was that actually supposed to, like, it wasn't supposed to be tight, right? There's been health issues with the artist.
It was supposed to be 12 issues. It was always planned to be 12 issues.
Okay, so like we're not that far from the end. I guess that's a better comp than 2, because I do think there's a, like, he gets so much credit for being, because of the Marvel stuff and the ongoing nature and the length of it, of being this long-term plotter. But I think one thing that he's evolved in the more recent years is like, okay, taking that thinking, but now condensing it into basically one graphic novel sized package. And I think Decorum, which I think isn't perfect and is more of a Mike Huddleston showcase than anything at the end of the day, but it's also like, it's tight. It does what it wants to do and it gets out. And is he better at that now than he was in the early days? I think probably. But what you lose is you lose some of the freewheeling. It's just sort of like, I don't know what the rules are and I'm going to break them because I don't know them, stuff that happens in the nightly news in Pax Romana, you know? Or even the Red Wing has a thing where, so the one piece we didn't talk about is, you know, I mentioned there's this very, very brief allusion to like social engineering and going back and meeting a civilization. And there are these text pages that sort of, they're like diaries of meeting this, like not innovative, but like it's an experiment. It's trying stuff. I just think we've literally seen it better from this creator before. But those moments I got engaged with. I assume that was something that was going to continue through the rest of this arc. And I actually kind of wish it had. But it gets dropped pretty quickly, I guess, is the big thing here.
It's literally only that one issue. It feels like something that you do throughout the entire series.
Yeah, right.
You spend multiple issues, or at the very least throughout the issue, beyond those 4 pages. Like you go back to one of those pages you have stuff in the quote unquote present, and then a page of in the past.
Yep.
As whereas having the 4 or right in a row with one another, or makes it feel a bit more slight.
Yeah, agree. No, so I mean, I think at the end of the day, like there's a lot of time travel comics, a lot of time travel narratives that I'd probably recommend over this. You know, I even think something like Mark Miller's Chrononauts is like a lot more fun version of this, frankly. Not a perfect comic by any measure, but like I just think it's more enjoyable and it's clearer in what it's trying to do. Obviously, I talked about Paper Girls, and we've referenced stuff here as well. There are better examples, definitely.
Yeah. Hell, even if you want to go with the idea of the relationship between fathers and sons and time travel, Back to the Future is right there.
Sure, yeah, exactly.
I even have one where one of the characters changes history or nefarious means.
Which is always an interesting premise, I think, as well. I've also started reading, I haven't finished it, but I started reading Isaac Asimov's The End of Eternity. I've been on kind of a Asimov v. Hickman kick of late, as you know, Sean. And and that one is an interesting, it's been an interesting read so far as well, just in terms of like, you know, because the thing there is like somebody who's really interested in the mechanics of it all. But then how do you blend that with narrative momentum and emotional resonance through character, right? And that becomes the challenge in a good time travel story. So that's my rec for the moment. Obviously, there's a whole history of the medium that has plenty of examples.
The one that I actually go for is my favorite novel of all time. This Is How You Lose the Time War.
Ooh, okay.
It's a romance between 2 people who are fighting a time war against one another.
Yeah, I have not read that. I'm adding that to the queue. All right, awesome.
That is just beautiful. Oh, like I cried when I got to the final pages.
Who's the author?
It's 2 authors. I'm bad with names, so just give me a sec.
This is How You Lose the Time Worm. Write it down.
Amal El Motar and Max Gladstone.
Cool. I will check that out. Sean, where can people find you? Where should they look for your stuff?
I'm on Twitter at DeathChrist2000. I write for Panel X Panel, among other places. I have a blog, the kingandredandblue.blogspot.com, which has been a bit dormant lately, but I'm hoping to bring that up sometime over the summer. I just recently released a book through Archfield Press called The Tower Through the Trees. It's a solar punk novel about the death of the last city. I generally do stuff for hire. I'm a writer and editor, so if you need anything, just let me know.
Cool. Perfect. Appreciate you joining. Again, I'm Dave. People can find my stuff at comicbookherald.com, of course, and at Comic Book Herald on Twitter and Instagram. We will be back next month with the start of Manhattan Projects here on Hickmania. If you like the conversation here and want to play along in the reading club, you can, of course, follow along on the Comic Book Herald podcast or YouTube channel. Like, subscribe, share, comment, all that fun stuff if you want to make sure you get these updates as they come out. So thanks for listening, everybody. And as always, enjoy the comics.